And if you're happy, I'll just set out a couple of the questions that we've had. Obviously, what is the catch? There's some interest in the fact that the recreational catch of sand flathead has been trending down over the last few surveys. Is it expected to continue, and won't this fix the problem?
Okay, so how do we know what recreational fishers catch? So in Tasmania and most states of Australia, we don't have to report our catch of recreational fishing, as do the commercials. So there are different methods that we can use to try and assess recreational catch. We're actually right at the forefront of that. So Jeremy Lyle, who recently retired from IMAS, was actually instrumental in terms of developing survey methodologies to assess recreational fisheries, right back to the first national recreational fishing survey that happened in, first major one that happened in 2001. And Jeremy's been, called up all over the world for his expertise, and he's trained myself and a couple of others up in the methodologies. So yeah, right at the forefront, still recognised as a global leader in this space. So whilst people feel that it's guesstimates and a bit of black magic, there is some very solid science behind this. It's been peer reviewed by many different people. It's all through the scientific literature. They're techniques that are used in a whole range of different surveys for various things that you probably do in your day-to-day life and didn't even know that there was some survey methodology behind it that's driving what you're doing. So anyway, so what we do is that it's a two-stage design. We do it every 5 years. It's our general fishing survey. It's a whole of community based. So we used to use the white pages because that used to be reliable as a good source of getting into households. That is now not much good for anything, even the doorstop. So we now use commercial data sets. So every time you log into Facebook or sign up to a Flybuys card, someone's harvesting your data and we go and buy it in the back end, so we can get all this information about who's where in Australia. We don't get personal information in terms of names and numbers, but all we're trying to do with this survey is, to start with, is get a representative random sample of Tasmanian households, and we stratify that by geographic region. So the Australian Bureau of Stats have different regions in Tasmania. So there's sort of the northwest, the northeast, the metro areas, the north and south. So we're making sure we're getting random samples of households from all those different regions. So we're spreading out across the state. So what this is called, it's a probabilistic design. So we can actually, that sample of people we take, we can compare to the Australian Bureau of Statistics stats about what kind of demographics are living in households, and actually ramp it up to that sample represents the population of Tasmania. So it's not just the avid fishers that go fishing 20 times, 20 times plus a year. It's also getting those families that might go once to the shack or various things. So it's a random design. Now, where we start with is, so that we don't know if they're fishing households to start with, because we also don't have a fishing license or any sample frame to identify fishers in Tasmania. And this is what makes these surveys difficult and more expensive, is we have to find those needles in a haystack. But that first step allows us to get a participation rate. So we ring the household, we ask them a series of questions about their household. So who lives in it, what's the age, demographic, a few things about education, income, various things, because they're those key points that allow us to calibrate back to the Australian Bureau of Statistics stats to represent the Tasmanian population. We then ask, do you fish or do you intend to fish? And that's by each person in that household. So we get from that the participation rate from our sample. We know how our sample represents the Tasmanian population, so we can expand that up. In the last survey, we called just over 3,000 households to get that sample. And in the 12 months prior to that survey, it was estimated that 106,000 Tasmanian residents aged 5 years or older fished for at least once in Tasmania. So about 25% of Tasmanians recreationally fish at least once in a year. From that point, those households that have identified that they do fish, we invite into a second phase of the survey, where we contact them monthly over a 12-month period. And if they fish frequently, we may contact them more frequently. The whole idea is to reduce recall bias and take the burden off the respondent. So, you know, we've got a series of interviewers that ring, generally middle-aged ladies, because we don't want anyone to feel threatened that they're having their fishing spots stolen. And we've found that they get much better response rates, so there's a bit of strategy in that as well. And yeah, so we will contact those households monthly and ask what fishing activities happened, and a whole range of questions about method, where, when, how many people, what was caught, what was released, what were the reasons for release. So we get a really detailed understanding of fishing events, and it's, you know, minimising that recall. So we're trying to catch them as soon as possible after. We had 584 households in the last survey, which represented just under 1,500 people. And Flathead by far is the main target species. Sorry, the main caught species in Tasmania. It represented 68% of the total fish catch by number, and 96% of that is southern sand flathead, and 4% is tigers and others. All right, so there was a question there about the declining harvest rate, and that is correct. But interestingly, the numbers caught haven't declined dramatically, or not significantly. So the blue bars here were the total caught, and you can see with the confidence intervals there. So that's just a measure of uncertainty around our estimate. So it's just under 2 million fish, plus or minus a couple of 100,000. That's reasonably consistent, those blue bars. Where it's dropped away, and this was the point that was made in the question, is in the kept catch. So this is a white bars, you know, that's dropped away each year. But what's actually happening is the blue line here, and looking on the right-hand side, this is the release rate of flathead, sand flathead, sorry, all flathead. But keeping in mind that 96% of what's been reported is sand flathead, has been increasing, with a particular jump around here. Now, there was two things that happened. Obviously, the size limit went up from 30 centimetres to 32, around there. But the other thing that's been happening, and this is where we're seeing a lot of worrying signs, is the number of big fish, or the proportion of small fish in the population, is increasing dramatically. So we're seeing a much higher release rate. People are still catching the same numbers, and this is why this is a difficult message to communicate, is because by numbers, things, you know, they're not great, but they're not as bad if you compare it to a biomass issue, which is how we assess fisheries. So in this survey year, there was 1.6 million sand flathead caught, mainly inshore, more released than kept, mainly from boats, mainly hook and line, and mainly during the spawning season, December to January, and moving into February and March. So this is looking at participation across the surveys. So number of fishers, it's remained reasonably consistent. It dropped down a little bit, but it came up a bit again in the last survey. As a percentage of population, you know, we talked sort of, it's hovered around that 20 to 25% mark since 2000. But effort has declined. So up here, we've got the effort declining. And what's really interesting to me about this is that if you look at it in terms of where that effort is declining, in the boat fishery, so these are actually standard errors, not confidence intervals. So if it's a statistical sort of mumbo jumbo, but it's probably only just a significant difference between those two first years and these 2 years. So it has dropped away, probably not significantly. Where it has dropped away significantly is shore fishing. And I put this down in just from my personal experience, and I'd be interested to hear maybe some of the other panelists' thoughts on this. You know, shore fishing in Tasmania is not what it used to be, and a lot of that comes down to the lack of opportunity around flathead and some other species that, you know, used to be more available from the shore. But so most of that decline is in shore fishing. The other thing to note, and NRE put out a information paper a couple of days ago, which I think, Jamie, would be great if you guys could share as well. Had some really interesting stats on boat numbers from mast and the increase in vessel size over the last 20 years, and also the engine capacity over the last 20 years, showing that people just have the capacity in wreck boats now to go further and hunt more and look around. So if we convert the number of fish to weight, so this is using an average weight, provides a comparison of wreck and commercial fisheries production. In 2017-18, it was estimated 184 tonne, about 50 times greater than the commercial catch of sand flathead taken from state fishing waters. And as we saw from the Commonwealth fishing waters, it's fairly minuscule as well. The trend of significant greater recreational catch is consistent over the 4 surveys conducted over the last approximately 20 years. So even just to back of the envelope calculate this, if we're saying there's 100,000 wreck fishes in Tasmania, even if we said half of them caught the bag limit once a year, so 50,000 times 20, you're at 1 million fish, and sort of up into those, hundreds of tons. So, even if we've got some area or variation in terms of the order of magnitude, this is a real thing. Just the last one on the wreck fishery, just to point out, where we can start to use some of the data as well to understand how effective, existing management measures are, or what if they're having an effect at all. So this is showing the proportion of fisher days where there was retained catch of flathead. So this is about almost 900 trips that we recorded where flathead were caught, and the number of sand flathead that were retained per fisher per trip. So 1 fish, 2 fish, etc., right through to bagging out up the end here at 20 fish. The blue line works on the right-hand column. So this is the cumulative number of fishers' days affected by the bag limit. So here we can see about 4% were bagging out. If we come back to a bag limit of 10, it would have only affected about 20% of the trips. If we came back to a bag limit of 5, you're sort of starting to get towards affecting 50% of the trips. Even if you come back to a bag limit of 2, so that's where you're getting to effect on 70 or 75% of the trips, where you start to get that reduction in effort. So this is one of the issues we have, is that the bag limit at the moment is fairly ineffective. Now, this isn't saying people can't catch 20 fish. This is just the reality of what's happening in Tasmania on a given fishing day. So they may have chosen, I only need 5 fish. I just want to get the kids 2 fish so they can, get them off the iPad for a little while. So this isn't suggesting that people can't catch 20 fish. It's just they're either choosing not to, or it's getting harder. Okay,